Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. We have a fantastic show for you tonight with such a great lineup. Here with me in Los Angeles, Lisa Booth and Charlie Kirk. We have Sarah Carter standing by. And later on, we'll be joined by Peter Schweitzer, too, who has some bombshell revelations of staggering corruption linked to Joe Biden. Do not miss that. And of course, we'll take a moment to reflect on the life of John McCain. But first, I was in Hawaii last week with my family and spent much of it waiting for a hurricane. But it turned out the real storm was on the East Coast, with those dramatic courtroom developments involving Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. The establishment were quick to call it the worst week of the Trump presidency, a turning point that would end with Donald Trump's impeachment. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats launched a new attack on the GOP's culture of corruption. Well, they're right about the corruption, but I'm not sure they're best placed to make that charge. Let's cut through last week's hot air and partisan bluster with a few simple truths. The Mueller inquiry was set up to investigate two things: Russian meddling and potential collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. There's no evidence that the Russians or any other enemy actually affected the election. But to be fair, Mueller has unearthed important and useful details about Russia's attempts to do so. Most of the indictments so far are related to that. None of them have been about collusion. Paul Manafort's trials have nothing to do with either Russian meddling or collusion. The Michael Cohen business last week, again, had nothing to do with either Russian meddling or collusion. So all that elitist outrage was about things that were outside the mandate of the Mueller investigation. But should you care about them anyway? Let's start with Manafort. We showed you in Swamp Watch a few months ago that Paul Manafort practically invented the swamp. He pioneered corrupt lobbying and influence peddling in Washington, especially by foreign governments. The president may value his personal loyalty, but no Trump supporter should shed any tears for Paul Manafort. If drain the swamp means anything, it means shaming Manafort. But what about the rest of them? Where's the investigation into the sleazy dealings of all the other swamp creatures in both parties? Just to pick a random name, where's the Podesta trial? Now, let's look at Michael Cohen. The truth is, as we showed you in another Swamp Watch, that he's a swampy sleazebag too. They'd barely counted the votes on election night before Cohen was pimping himself out to giant corporations trying to cash in on his connection to Donald Trump. But wait, say the elitists, this isn't about Michael Cohen. It's about what Donald Trump asked him to do. That's the corruption. That's why the president should be impeached. Okay, let's be clear. It's obvious what happened here. A decade or so before he ran for president, Donald Trump had affairs. Weeks before the election, he paid hush money to stop the details coming out and derailing his campaign. But professional politicians spend billions of dollars every year buffing up their images. How is this any different? The elitist political class, they write campaign rules legalizing their own corruption. Corruption that, unlike payoffs for playmates and porn stars, actually affects your life. Elitist corruption is payoffs for politicians and policy advisors who do their time in Congress and then end up on corporate boards. Elitist corruption is campaign cash in exchange for policies that help the big donors. Elitist corruption is the revolving door between government and lobbying and big business, so the economy is rigged in favor of the rich and powerful instead of working Americans. All of that corruption is legal because the elitists have legalized it. They are the real threat to American democracy and have been for years. Tell me what you think at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton X. Joining me now to discuss, Fox News contributor Sarah Carter. Sarah, we met the other week in D.C. I was so excited to see you. I'm such a fan. You said you loved the show. We said, well, let's get you on, and here you are. I'm so happy to see you.
I'm happy to be here, Steve, and the feeling is mutual. It was a great monologue. I think you pointed out so many significant and important facts there about this two-tiered justice system and what's happened here in Washington. I'm grateful for one thing, though. You know, had President Donald Trump not been elected, we would have never really seen the scope of this or the magnitude of this.
So let's just take one of the points there. There's so much to choose from, but I want to focus on this point about equal justice or the lack of it. Let's just look at Podesta. He's such a good example. His name has come up in the Mueller process, along with Manafort. Is anything happening that's equivalent to what's happened with Manafort to Podesta?
Well, he's been given immunity if he testifies against Manafort. And so I think that's very significant. Look, we've been seeing this from the beginning. And this is the reason why these congressional investigations have been so important to get the information out to the American people. Let's just go back to 2016 on July 4th weekend when the FBI was interviewing Hillary Clinton. When they interviewed her, she was basically not under oath. It was done on a July 4th weekend very quietly. She had Cheryl Mills with her, which was extraordinary because she was actually a witness as well if they were investigating her. Later, we find out that Comey had basically already started to write the exoneration letter way before the interview, which is extraordinary in and of itself. So what we're seeing here is a consistent pattern of behavior where the establishment, and you pointed that out in your monologue, the swamp, whether it be the right or the left, because I think we've seen both sides just vehemently go after this administration, go directly after the administration. Paul Manafort, we knew it. Paul Manafort is part of this big swamp problem. You're very right. But they didn't do the same with Hillary Clinton. And if you look at the FBI 302s, those were the ones on the Hillary Clinton interview, because remember, they didn't record it. So they had to wait until those 302s were released. We find out that shortly after the story broke that she had a private server, just weeks after that, she used BleachBit to clean off her entire server, and significant amounts of emails just disappeared forever. But she was never reprimanded for that. She was never held accountable for that. Just imagine if President Trump would have done that, if somebody would have done that around him. I mean, this would be extraordinary. And I mean, I really believe it would be all over the news. But it just quietly kind of went away. And then just look at the FISA applications and the dossier and the use of the Clintons who actually, Hillary Clinton herself and her foundation is still under investigation right now. I don't think people realize this. The Clinton Foundation is actually under investigation by the FBI right now. And it was the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC who actually paid, right, for the dossier to a foreign spy. And just interesting.
And the Clinton Foundation, of course, and you've played a real part in exposing all this, is again, a bit like Manafort, is the model of how the swamp works in terms of cash for access and policy. Just one quick last question to you, Sarah, before I bring in Lisa and Charlie. What's your prediction on that investigation to the Clinton Foundation? Is that going to go anywhere? What are we going to see, and when might we see it?
I absolutely do believe it's going to go somewhere. What I know is that there were 5 FBI field offices involved in this investigation. They are still involved in this investigation. Little Rock, Arkansas is taking the lead. I think there's significant information on Haiti that's still out there. I think there's significant information on money that was being moved into the Clinton Foundation, and that they are continuing this investigation. It would be a shame. It would be a shame if they dropped this investigation or tried to bury it, because I think a lot of people, there's been a lot of injustice. In particular, as much good as some parts of the Clinton Foundation have done, I think there's a lot that needs to be investigated and exposed.
Yes, I mean, and this is going to keep on going unless this kind of behavior, this swampy behavior, is held to account. So with me now, Fox News contributor and senior fellow at Independent Women's Voice, Lisa Booth, and Turning Point USA founder and author of the upcoming book, Campus Battlefield, Charlie Kirk. First time on the show, Charlie, great to see you. Lisa, an old friend back with us.
Yes. And it's so good to see Charlie. Yeah, I've known him for years now, and he's doing such great work with Turning Point. So I'm really proud of you, Charlie. So just an aside.
Okay, there you go. So I just wanted to get to this point about corruption. This word's been thrown around a lot this week by the Democrats, the culture of corruption. It's just amazing to me that as I said, it's what goes on in Washington every single day. I give you a donation, you give me the policy that you want. That is literally legalized corruption. They don't seem to have any shame about throwing this word around, even though they're doing it.
Well, exactly. And that's because the focus is to try to damage President Trump. And that's where the mainstream media's focus is as well. That's why they, intensely focus on things like Manafort and Michael Cohen. Obviously, neither of them are doing good things, but the media intensely focuses on this because they want to hurt President Trump. It's obvious. People at home see it. But what is remarkable is the NBC and Wall Street Journal had a poll basically showing that President Trump's approval ratings, despite all this attention, have remained unscathed. And I think that's because President Trump never really tried to pretend like he is something that he is not, right? People knew what they were signing up for when they voted for him. And what they wanted to see was him to blow up the system. And they also wanted economic opportunity. And we've seen that under President Trump. So I think that's why, despite numerous reporting on these two individuals, it hasn't hurt them.
And Charlie, it seems to me that what's going on here is that the system, the establishment, the elite, whatever word you want to use, they just can't bear the thought of this outsider who's come along, who doesn't know exactly how it all works, hasn't got the best hotshot DC campaign finance lawyers and all the rest of it. He's being tripped up on these sorts of things. But the basic point, as Lisa was saying, is he's delivering his promises. The economy's improving, but they just want to get him out, however they can do it.
Right, and they're trying to undo the results of a rightful election. And look, I call them the ruling class. And so it's more than just the lobbyists. It's more than just the cartel of the trial lawyers. But if you actually look at the concentration of wealth in America, it has migrated around the counties around Washington, D.C. Right. If you look in the 1970s, the wealthiest counties in America were around Detroit, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Now, 8 out of 10 of the wealthiest counties in America are around Washington, D.C. What do they produce? Do they make cars? Do they do financial deals? Right. Is it Silicon Valley? No. Crony deals. They take our money. It's like the worst brokerage Ponzi scheme you could ever imagine. Send us your money, we'll send you back none of it, and then we get richer ourselves. And this is why Donald Trump won, but they're angry. And I call them the ruling class because they truly believe that there should be a bifurcated society where we should have a different set of rules if you're well connected, if you know the right senators, and you have access to the deep state. And Donald Trump came in and he was not supposed to win the primary, he was not supposed to win the election, and he sure was not supposed to actually fulfill his promises. That's the worst thing that you could possibly do. And they're upset and they're trying to go near anyone who's close to him. What upsets me most about the Manafort and Cohen thing, of course they've done illegal things, pled guilty, and obviously been convicted. It's because of their proximity to the president that they have gone, that the prosecutors go after him, not because of what they did. They passed on these cases previously, but because of their relationship with the president, they went after him.
That's right, and that's why I think it's so important to sort of keep reminding everyone of this, because otherwise they just win, the establishment win, and you never get anyone like Donald Trump or any other kind of outsider actually challenging the elite. Sarah, just last word to you on this portion of the discussion. This extends not just, as Charlie was saying, and Lisa, Congress and the policy aides and all the rest of it. It's the what we now refer to as the deep state, the bureaucracy, the kind of permanent institutions of government. They're part of this too, and you've really done sterling work exposing that. What do you think? Are they kind of salivating now because they think that they've got the president, or are they still nervous that won't be able to pin it all down?
Look, I think they're a little bit nervous. Well, look what happened today with Lanny Davis, Michael Cohen's attorney. He had to walk back his statements that Michael Cohen has information about President Trump and the Russians. Now he came out and said, well, I shouldn't have said that. We really don't have that kind of information. That's not accessible to me or my client right now. I'm not sure. So he's covering for what he said. And one thing we've noticed is that a lot of stories that have been written on other networks, vis-a-vis CNN has not retracted some of those yet. But, stories that said Michael Cohen has some kind of information on President Trump. No, he does not. So I think the deep state right now is still shaking. They're concerned. They wouldn't be fighting back so hard. They wouldn't be tweeting out these tweets from John Brennan and, Michael Hayden. And I'm talking about both the left and the right. They wouldn't be attacking so viciously if they weren't afraid.
Sarah, thank you so much. It was really great to have you with us tonight. I hope you can come back soon. We'll leave it there for now.
I look forward to it.
And I just want to make sure that we spend a bit of time, obviously a huge story this weekend, and we've been marking it all day on this channel, as have others, which is the death of John McCain. Just wanted to invite you both to share some thoughts about that. Lisa?
Well, I have a ton of gratitude to him, as we all should in the country. He served. He was willing to put his life on the line to protect the freedoms that we hold dear. And so a lot of gratitude to him and thankful for her service. I've also gotten to know Megyn while she worked at Fox, and my heart breaks for her. I just know, even from working for her, all you have to do is read the beautiful statement she put out about her dad to know how close she was with him. And so my first thought was to her, and my heart just really broke for her because I know she's dealing with a lot right now. And this is probably a really incredibly tough time for her. So praying for her and her family.
Thank you. Charlie?
I was in 8th grade, and that was the first presidential campaign I was really aware of. And kind of piqued my interest. I said, maybe this is politics I want to get something into. He's an American hero. He'll be missed. Whether you agree or disagree with him, it's irrelevant. You know, he definitely stood for what he believed in, and we need more servant leaders like him.
Thank you both. Actually, I really want to echo what Lisa said about Meghan's statement. I too got to know Meghan a bit. Literally, I think of everything I've read and seen, that letter from Meghan McCain was easily the most powerful and moving. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, do please look that up. It really kind of captures what we've all been talking about and so many others have focused on. Coming up, the Democrats and their elitist allies never stop going on about how President Trump is an enemy of the truth. But this week, Chuck Schumer was caught red-handed in a giant, cynical, self-serving lie. We'll tell you what it is next. Welcome back, everyone. It's been a busy week, so you may have missed this pronouncement from on high, delivered with great urgency by Senate Minority Leader Senator Charles Schumer. He spoke on the Senate floor this week regarding Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and the Democrats' dream scenario, a Trump impeachment. Watch.
It is unseemly for the President of the United States to be picking a Supreme Court justice who could soon be effectively a juror in a case involving the President himself. I believe Chairman Grassley has scheduled a hearing for Judge Kavanaugh too soon, and I am calling on him to delay the hearing.
He's going to be a juror in a case involving the president. Before you go rushing to your constitutional law books, let me reassure you, Senator Schumer is either lying or mistaken. You decide. As the Wall Street Journal's editorial board was quick to point out this week, quote, "The Chief Justice presides over Senate impeachment trials. Associate justices have no role. The jury is 100 senators who get a vote only after the House impeaches a president." The left's constant refrain these days is facts matter, except, I guess, when it suits their political ends. Charlie and Lisa are back to talk about it. Charlie, look, I guess we shouldn't be amazed that politicians are hypocrites. But this is just unbelievable. He's saying something that's totally false.
I could just see how this happened. I think an intern of his probably read it on Twitter or something. Oh, it must be true, Senator. You got to say this. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, a simple reading of the Constitution could make you know that the Supreme Court does not actually oversee the impeachment proceedings. And look, this is what's really happening is they are freaking out because the left, they control education, they control the media. The only vertical that they thought they were going to solidify for the next 100 years if Hillary would have won is the courts. And this president has now installed 26, that's right, 26 circuit court judges, the most amount of appellate judges in a president's first 18 months, and now he's going to have 2 Supreme Court judges that are constitutionalists in nature. The left, this is not according to plan because the courts, they wanted to corrupt them with activist, revisionist judges that did not abide by the Constitution. Yes. Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are direct defiance to the left's agenda to redefine America.
And Lisa, I mean, those substantive points are so well made, but let's just for a second also just talk about this. He's on the Senate floor. He's saying something that is totally false in order to make a political point. And yet these are the people who go on and on about the lies and the assault on truth. I mean,
well, I think the American people aren't buying into, this. I mean, look, this wouldn't be the first time that Chuck Schumer lied. I'm surprised he wasn't crying on the Senate floor. Democrats have been petulant children with Kavanaugh, and the reason being is they can't do anything to stop this from happening. So what they're doing is kicking and screaming, being as loud as possible because they can't, unless Kavanaugh somehow implodes during the confirmation hearing, this is happening. And I think you're also going to see Democrats like Joe Manchin, Donnelly, Heitkamp, that all voted for Gorsuch, who are also going to get on board on this. You look at polling in their states, majorities of voters in those states, they want Kavanaugh confirmed. And you know what is really disappointing, too? Chuck Schumer won't even sit down with him. And Mitch McConnell met with Elena Kagan the first day she was on Capitol Hill. So we've seen obstruction, crying, and just basically Democrats acting like children.
I can't wait for the hearings where they're going to say, Judge Kavanaugh, we have a lot of concerns about your daughter's basketball record when you were coach of her basketball team.
Or the Nationals.
No, seriously, you rung up a lot of credit card debt buying too many baseball tickets. I mean, this guy has probably lived the cleanest life of any person ever to try to be on the D.C. circuit, let alone the Supreme Court. But again, the left has an agenda, and it involves corrupting the courts. And the fact that the president is going full steam ahead and appointing these constitutionalist judges, they are actually losing their mind. And look, it's going to be up to the Republican senators to fulfill their promise to confirm them. You think you'll see some Democrats come?
Yeah, I mean, it's true, isn't it? Because actually, if you look back, they've gotten used to the way in which they've been able to advance their policy agenda through the courts rather than through winning actual elections. And it looks like that's coming to an end.
Well, absolutely. And Charlie's absolutely right in the sense of this. The changes to the judiciary are going to be a lasting legacy of President Trump. So this is a big deal for Republicans. It's a big deal for President Trump as well. And again, look, the hearing's going to be on September 4th. Like this is happening. He's going to be confirmed again, unless he implodes, says something stupid. This is basically, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you look at some of the big decisions. I mean, public sector unions are no longer going to be the same thanks to Neil Gorsuch. President Trump puts Neil Gorsuch in. You had the Janus decision this last June. People are no longer required to be part of public sector unions. That is a $50 million annual hit to the Democrat Party. You can see.
By the way, it's a lot. We did something. I think it's more. That's in some. It's that amount of money in some states.
That's correct. Yeah, that's just the tip.
That's right. It's an incredible. You're quite right. That is probably one of the more lasting changes, but again, perfectly fair. I mean, this is something that the individual should be able to choose. I remember back in the UK, that was something that was a key part of the Thatcher back in the 80s. Union reforms is to give individual people the opportunity to decide whether they participate. But I think that what you'll see, you're quite right. When you're just looking at the reporting that's coming out, Susan Collins, who people said at the beginning, well, she may not go with this, being very positive in the sort of signals she's sending.
Well, absolutely. And she basically recently came out and said, she's going to support him. I mean, so basically, all President Trump, all they need to do is get Republicans solidly behind, which it looks like they are there now. And I think you're going to have Democrats come on board because you look at these red states. People like Joe Manchin is in a state that President Trump won by 42 points. So they're feeling the pressure from their electorate and trying to please them. So I think you're going to see at least 3 Democrats come that way.
And then one last question, Lisa. Is there any possibility that you can foresee that they use procedures to kind of delay it beyond the election? I've read stuff about requesting all this paperwork. And are they able to do that? Or do the Republicans control the process so they can basically get it done?
They've been trying with the paperwork, but they've also turned over more documents from his time with the executive branch than I think any other Supreme Court nominee has before. I mean, there's been a lot of transparency. Also, you look at over 300 opinions, right? A lot of this information is already public that they could be looking at. So again, the reason why we're seeing this obstruction, the reason why we're seeing the kicking and screaming, the reason why we're seeing so much noise from the Democrats is they know that there's nothing they can do to stop it. And as long as President Trump has Republicans behind him in the Supreme Court pick, then you're going to see these other Democrats facing tough re-elections also get on board.
And it's not going to be far away. Thank you both for that.
Very soon.
Coming up, is your city offering your money to the world's richest man in secret bribes? We'll give you the details next. Welcome back, everyone. Across the country, the search for the future location of Amazon's second headquarters, referred to as HQ2, is shrouded in secrecy. And it's not just the public that's being kept in the dark. Even city councils and civic leaders can't find out what tax credits and other perks are included in the bids submitted by cities. Another word for those bids? Bribes. Bribes given with your tax dollars to Jeff Bezos, already the world's richest man. So what can be done to shine a spotlight on what's being offered? Let's ask Good Jobs First Activation Coordinator Scott Klinger, who's been all over this. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. What's your reading of where we are in the hunt for a location for HQ2 and what that means for the residents, the taxpayers of all these cities that are bidding?
Well, thanks for having me, Steve. It means that billions of dollars is up for stake that cities are going to pay to Amazon, and citizens know nothing about where this money is going or what the deal structures are. There's 20 cities that are in the finals for this HQ2, and none of them have yet released their full details. Some of it's quite disturbing. Montgomery County did release their bid to a journalist, and all the pages were completely blacked out with magic marker. So this is, and it's not fair because the tax money that Amazon's not going to have to pay, or Amazon employees might not even have to pay, to governments because Amazon, in some of the bids, gets to keep their employees' state tax withholdings. That money is going to be made up by normal middle-class citizens, by small businesses that will have to cover Amazon's costs for the schools that Amazon employees' children go to, the firefighters that protect homes, the road crews that plow streets and pave potholes. So it's basically a big shift from city services paid for by all of us, and I think the right and left agree that whatever taxes we pay should be fair. And so this is something for all citizens to be concerned about.
I mean, this is classic corporate welfare, isn't it? But I just wanted to just emphasize something you said right at the beginning there. You are talking about billions of dollars, not millions of dollars. These are huge sums, right?
Yeah, the highest bid that we know of at this point is from Maryland, which is about $8.5 billion. But the other thing that's important to say here is that
unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, but the other thing that's unbelievable is money doesn't really matter to Amazon. What Amazon wants to locate is in a city that has talented employees, that has good infrastructure, and that's an enjoyable place to live so they can attract 50,000 people to work there. St. Louis bid over $7 billion and didn't make the cut for the 20 cities. So, you know, and one of the problems is that in the second round here, Amazon has asked cities to sign non-disclosure agreements, but has not agreed to not disclose the city's bids. So they can go to Boston and say, hey, Boston, you know, would you like to have us? Do you know what Austin bid or Miami bid? And kind of use the city's bids against them with other contenders.
It's such a great example of what we talk about all the time, how it's all rigged in favor of these giant corporations and working people just get screwed. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights there and for being on this story. And let's talk again when we know who's won and how much they paid. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's bring in
Thank you so much, Steve.
Lisa and Charlie. Charlie, you're really fired up about this.
Yeah, and look, so I'm a fighter for the American taxpayer. People do not realize the corruption that Amazon has within its ranks in the U.S. government. So let's just look at some facts. Bezos has a net worth well over $100 billion. He owns the Washington Post, which is the most feared, political newspaper. Any senator, any congressman, if the Washington Post calls, they immediately, they go up against the wall. So he uses that as a weapon against politicians. And he currently is lobbying for, mind you, a $100 billion contract for the Department of Defense, $10 billion a year annually. Wow. It's called the JEDI contract. Anyone can look it up and see it. And they're using unethical means. Vanity Fair, Reuters, Daily Caller all had stories about it. It was the front page of Drudge last week about how Bezos has hired top-tier lobbyists to try to subsidize the verticalization empire in every part of the American economy. Healthcare, science,
what's he selling
food,
to?
technology,
what's Amazon's
cloud computing. Amazon Web Services, yes.
Okay.
And now, mind you, Amazon loses money in every single vertical except their web services. So he wants the American taxpayers to fork over $10 billion a year, which would make us at a huge security risk, so that he can continue to vertically monopolize all parts of the American economy. This, as American taxpayers, we have to put against it. This is a crony capitalist cartel.
Well, I mean, how do I follow that? Well, what's interesting about this, too, I mean, look, this isn't the first time that, like, a state or city would offer tax incentives to try to bring businesses to the state, right? But I think the reason why this is getting so much attention is because the numbers are so staggering and it's so egregious. I mean, you look at Maryland, I think they've offered something like $8.5 billion. New Jersey was $7 billion. And the only reason we found out about some of this, particularly looking at New Jersey, was because a citizen filed a lawsuit against them trying to disclose some of the details. And what I read in the New York Times, which I found really interesting, is that you've got Chamber of Commerce affiliates and other, economic development groups that are sort of spearheading some of this to shield it from FOIA requests and from public disclosure. However, the flip side of this is Amazon would say, well, hey, you look at a city like Seattle, we're bringing tens of thousands of jobs, and we're also going to contribute, tens of billions of dollars to the local economy. But I think taxpayers ultimately have a right to know what is being offered that they're going to be on the hook for.
So that they can evaluate whether that equation is worth it, because there have been a lot of studies that show that actually it's all vanity. It doesn't work out. That actually, even if you add up all the jobs and the economic development from that, it doesn't actually match up when you think about the infrastructure that's needed, the schools and the services and all the rest of it. And actually, the final point is, like, why on earth would Amazon, literally this company that's steamrolling everyone else in the economy, need these bribes?
They're laughing all the way to the banks.
All right.
And they use the postal service in very unethical ways.
Oh, all right. We could go on all day, but we won't because we have to move on. Coming up, shocking new details on shady business deals in Joe Biden's family. Peter Schweitzer joins me for a special Swamp Watch you won't want to miss. That's next. Office. Well, tonight in a very special Swamp Watch, we have some shocking new details. Joining me now to explain, author of Secret Empires, How the American Political Class Hides Corruption and Enriches Family and Friends, the great Peter Schweitzer. Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm great, Steve. Great to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
So I'm just going to say, take it away. You have the information. Let's hear it.
Well, the story really begins on June 28th when Devon Archer, business partner to Hunter Biden, is convicted in a New York court involving a bond scheme where they fraudulently sold $60 million worth of bonds connected to an Indian tribe. One of the bank accounts that was used in that fraud was a bank account that Hunter Biden drew a lot of money from and a lot of foreign entities put a lot of money into. So just to give you an idea, over a 14-month period from 2014 through early 2016, while Joe Biden is vice president of the United States, a Ukrainian company called Burisma, it's controlled by a very corrupt oligarch, sends $3 million into this account. A Chinese government entity called Bohai Harvest, which is run by the Bank of China, sends $650,000 into this account. Keep in mind, this is only one account. We believe there are others. There are other cash transfers as well, Steve. There's $1.2 million that comes from some LLC from a small boutique Swiss bank. We don't know who's behind the LLC. The bank itself has been charged in 6 countries for money laundering, so that makes it kind of sketchy. There's $142,000 going into this account from the son-in-law of the former prime minister of Kazakhstan. So large amounts of foreign money flowing in, and the number one recipient of the cash coming out is the vice president's son, Hunter Biden.
It's so fascinating what you've unearthed here, because just, you know, all the focus, thanks to in large part to your research, really in the conversation around all this has been the Clinton Foundation and that family and the corruption around the Clintons. But it's looking like the Bidens are operating by the same playbook, which is getting the family into all this business, and especially at a time when China, as we're now realizing almost daily, is not some kind of benign partner, but America's #1 strategic rival. And yet they're doing business deals with the Chinese state. It's unbelievable while he's vice president.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Steve. I mean, we're all familiar with globalization and the phenomenon as it relates to the economy and corporations. Well, corruption is being globalized as well. You know, 70 years ago, foreign governments, were, a country like China or others were not quite as interested in every single thing that happens in Washington, D.C. Now what Washington, D.C. does can make you or break you, whether you're China, whether you're the Ukraine, you name it. So what do? They look for friends in Washington, and one of the best ways to make friends in Washington is to do deals with family members. You know, Joe Biden every year as vice president, he has to disclose his income, assuming those disclosures are honest. He can't have a big fat check from the Chinese government in that disclosure form. But his adult son, Hunter Biden, he doesn't have to disclose anything. So, you know, as I recount in the book, and we've talked about on your show, in December of 2013, Vice President Biden flies over on Air Force 2 to Beijing, China. On the plane with him is Hunter Biden. They have a lot of meetings. Vice President Biden doesn't really challenge the Chinese on much of anything. 10 days later, when they return, Bohai Harvest, this company we're talking about, agrees to a $1 billion private equity deal with Hunter Biden's firm. And that's just one example of the sort of thing we're talking about.
And this guy, I mean, you know, a lot of people on the Democrat side are talking about him as their preferred candidate for president next time.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, going to be a central issue because if you look at the trajectory of Joe Biden as vice president, he was essentially U.S. point person on Chinese policy, and he was widely criticized for going very soft on them as it related to the South China Sea. That's at the same time his son is getting large checks from the Chinese government. Joe Biden is also point person on U.S. policy towards Ukraine at the same time that his son is getting large checks from the Ukrainian government. And he's accused of looking the other way at fraudulent behavior and corruption within the government of Ukraine. While his son is getting paid, Vice President Biden makes 5 trips to Ukraine on very, very sensitive matters. And the suggestion that somehow he's not going to be sensitive to that fact is absolutely ridiculous.
Honestly, Peter, your work is so important, and we so appreciate you coming on and sharing it with us, and all the work we're doing together for Swamp Watch. Really appreciate it. Good to see you. See you soon.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Coming up, more on all of that and the real culture of corruption in Washington with Lisa and Charlie. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. So Lisa and Charlie were listening to that. I mean, what Peter brought up there actually focused on a really big issue, which is China's growing influence operations here in America.
Yeah, so I run a national conservative student activist organization now on 1,300 college and high school campuses. And I start to see these Confucius Institutes starting to pop up. You did a wonderful segment on it a couple weeks ago, talking about how money from the Chinese Communist government is flowing into U.S. universities. These chancellors and border regents and presidents are accepting the money to build these Confucius Institutes to try to get American students to have a better perception of China. China's our enemy. They're not just a rival.
That's right.
They hate our guts. If they could wipe us off the face of the earth, they would, and we're taking their Chinese communist money.
So as far as wipe us off, but certainly dominate. There's absolutely no question. They've set out a plan
disdain for the West. They
to
really
dominate the world.
That's correct.
World domination is how they put it in their language. Lisa, you found something interesting too that hasn't been reported widely on China and what they're up to.
Well, Christopher Wray had testified, I think it was back in February, that China was trying to infiltrate American universities through students, through teachers, which is obviously a point of concern. But there's so much talk about Russia, and everyone ignores China.
Exactly
and the Pentagon, even back in February, named China as one of our biggest threats to U.S. interests. You also look, the Pentagon has warned about increased military activity from China as well. And also another, sort of in the same vein of what Peter was talking about earlier, the Senator Feinstein thing and having a spy on her staff for over a decade basically got swept under the rug. And then when you pull the curtain back a little bit further and you look at her coziness with China over the years as well, her husband getting rich off of deals with China, and it certainly raises questions, but nobody's talking about that. It just gets swept under the rug.
So, and then as Peter, Joe Biden, as I said, a lot of Democrats, their top choice for president, while he's vice president, involved in all these family deals with the Chinese state.
And a lot of the problems we have with China today are because Biden let them do whatever they wanted. They hacked our cyber grid. They stole our IP. They're still classified in the World Trade Organization as a developing nation, despite being the second biggest economy in the world. Biden did nothing. And now it kind of makes sense why he did nothing, because his son was getting paid off by foreign interests.
Right. And then they go on about the Trump family and Jared and whatever. I mean, it's just so much worse.
And Dianne Feinstein was one of the lead individuals trying to bring China in as a permanent trading partner back, I think it was in 1999. So there's a lot of interesting relationships with that. And there's been reports of counterintelligence officials warning that this is what China is trying to do. They're trying to cultivate relationships, to use that as leverage with powerful Americans and their family members as well. So this is something we should be paying attention to, but nobody's going to talk about it besides you, I guess, and us tonight, because it doesn't have to do with Russia.
Influence.
There you are. I like it. Thank you both very much. That was great. Coming up, Big Tech's latest attempt at creepy mind control after the break.